first, I'm going to start off with Philippians 4:13, which is, I can do all this who gives me strength. Because, like, I was like, how am I going to do this? But then I was like, I remembered that the Lord can give me the strength to be able to do what I'm going to do, you know, in any aspect of life. Like, not just this, like, he can help me, you know, he can help us with, he can strengthen us to help us with our patience, with self-control, with, you know, being content, like, anything like that. And that's just, like, something that I always have to remember, because sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, how am I going to get through this? Like, what am I going to do? And then I'm like, oh, well, I can't just rely on my own strength, because that's not going to get me through it. I got to rely on God's strength too. So then I found in 1 Corinthians 2, 1 through 5. And I didn't even realize this was this the part that I didn't realize was in here? Okay, so 1 Corinthians 2, 1 through 5. So it was with me, brothers and sisters. When I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness, with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with the demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. And like when I read that, I didn't even realize that was like in the Bible. And I was like, well, that's how I felt last night. I was like, I have no idea. Like, I'm gonna have this great fear and trembling. But then the last part, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. And I was like, that is so true. Like, it's not what I'm saying, it's what Jesus is gonna say through me. And so then I kind of went off like the wisdom part. I was like, well, what, like, you know, human wisdom and God's wisdom kind of thing. So then, also, here, let me share Psalms 46:5 first. I found so many good verses. I was very, very excited. So Psalms 46:5 says, God is within her, she will not fall. God will help her at break of day. And I've highlighted this one before and, like, went over it and everything, because, like, there's been so many times that, you know, you wake up in the morning and you're like, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do? And then, like, just remembering that verse is there, and it's like, oh, yeah. Like, even Psalms 46 is really good, because it talks about God being our refuge and our strength, you know, an ever-present help in trouble. Even though, you know, therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. And, like, just like, you know, like, doing something with horses, you know, sometimes it can be like you feel like you're getting tossed around and you don't know what you're doing or what the horse is gonna do, you know, and so then you're like, oh my goodness, what's gonna happen, you know? But then just being like, you know, God is calm in every situation, like, he's there, like, he's not gonna let something bad, like, yes, he'll let bad things happen, but you'll get something out of it in return. And so I think that's just like something that's really good to remember. And then been reading through Proverbs a lot lately, and there's a lot about wisdom in the Proverbs, and I didn't really realize that, but so I found some verses that stuck out to me more were Proverbs 2:6, for the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. And so then, like, I was like, well, understanding, like, what, you know, how does that come? And so, like, I just kind of, you know, dove into it, and it's like, well, he can understand us, but we can also understand him, and we can do that from listening to his word and reading his word. And like, the true wisdom and understanding comes from God. Like, we don't just get that on our own. Like, we're not going to be able to decipher right from wrong if we, like, just use our mind, will, and emotions kind of thing. So then there was Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. And so then I was like, well, yeah, we can't just lean on our own understanding. We have to lean on God's understanding and wisdom. And then Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. And I think that just kind of puts it into perspective, like, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Like, that's powerful. And then knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. And it's like, wow, that's true. Like, that's actually, you know. And so I thought that was a really good one. And then there was this part in here that I didn't even realize was in here, but it says, say to wisdom, you are my sister, and to insight, you are my relative. And I was like, that's like, you know, like, they're right there, like, they're your sister, they're your relative, like, and like, I never even realized that was in there, and I was like, wow, like, what? Okay, so now I'm gonna go to James. So then in James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. And so, like, it's like, yes, how do we get the wisdom? You know, how can we get the wisdom from the Lord, like, and the understanding and the knowledge to be able to know what path he wants us to take or what door he wants us to go through, you know? And so, like, you know, by praying, by asking God, you know, reading like, getting in his word, seeing what it says. And then further in James 3:13 through 18, there's a whole little part that says 2 kinds of wisdom. And I was like, oh. So it says, who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. And when I read that, it really deciphered the difference between, like, worldly wisdom and, like, heavenly wisdom.
What's that scripture reference?
James 3:13 through 18. And, like, I was like, oh wow, like, and that's like all those the verses that go back to, are you dwelling on earthly things, or are you dwelling on heavenly things? Like, what are you setting your mind on? Like, just like in Galatians, like, are you living by the acts of the flesh, or are you living by the fruits of the Spirit? And so it just is like, you know, it just makes you stop and think, because, like, even just little actions that you do throughout the day really affect, like, how are you living that out? You know, how are you sowing the seed, and what are you going to reap from it, kind of, like, thing. So, just, like, being able to have, like, the wisdom and the knowledge of God, you know, you can't just expect to, like, just get it, or be like, oh, you know, and then, or, like, the, you know, how the world is like, this is, you know, how you need to have wisdom and everything, but, like, that's not the right kind of wisdom then, because then, you know, then you have envy and selfish ambition, and then, you know, you find disorder. But, like, the wisdom that comes from heaven is pure, you know, peace-loving, considerate, full of mercy. Like, that's the wisdom that, you know, you want to have. So, I think that's, like, I don't know how to wrap it up, but
that's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's so good.